Hello, my name's David Baker, and I look forward to spending some time with you looking at the literary world of the Old Testament. My undergraduate degree was in Hebrew language, and I went on to do further graduate work in other of the Semitic languages, related languages to Hebrew from the ancient Near East. And that helped me develop an interest in the background of the Old Testament, because a lot of the literature that we read in these other languages had relevance and compared or contrasted to the Old Testament in Hebrew scriptures. And so we'll be looking at some of these comparative texts in this course. We'll start by looking at creation accounts, because I imagine societies around the world are always asking, where did we come from? How did humanity come into being? And there are some striking parallels between what we have in Israel and what we have in Mesopotamia and Egypt, but also some great differences. We'll then be looking at stories of destruction, and specifically flood, because of course we know that in Genesis through Noah's flood, but in particular in Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, they have a couple of flood stories there that have striking parallels with the Old Testament. In fact, these texts were what started the ball rolling on people noticing these and saying, we've got to study more about the ancient Near East. Israel is also interested in history, and they present sections in not only the Pentateuch, but Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, recording their history. And there are a number of places where historical events that happened to Israel involved people from Egypt or Mesopotamia. And in some of these cases, we have texts from Egypt or Mesopotamia that talk about the same event happening. And we'll be comparing and contrasting the records, if you like, from both sides of a battle. Israel and the Assyrians, they each have their own records, and it's interesting to contrast these. And we'll also notice a few places where the names of some characters in the Old Testament are given outside the Bible, confirming their existence. Israel was not only interested in history, they were interested in worship. And there are texts that explain how to worship, ritual texts. And we'll compare those with ancient Near Eastern texts from Canaan, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. But then they also worshipped orally, if you like, by songs and hymns. And there are parallels with these same literatures there, because everybody wants to worship God. They use some of the same terminology, but their views of God are different, and that will come through in their prayers and their hymns. And finally, we'll look at what's called wisdom literature, answering questions about what is life? Why are we here? Why do we suffer? Especially if I'm sinless or I haven't gone against the gods, why am I suffering? Job asked this question, and so a number of ancient Near Eastern texts have the same kind of question, even though they have different responses. The Bible is also interested in sexuality and marriage, in the Song of Songs, for example. And we'll look at some parallel texts there, because erotic literature is, I imagine, part of literatures around the world, but it is strong in the ancient Near East as well. And then we're interested in how do we live life to the full, to the best of our advantage. And quite often we present these in the form of proverbs, short, pithy sayings, that many of them we get in the book of Proverbs, but some of them are word for word what we have in Egypt, for example. So we'll also be looking at some of these parallels. Again, looking for comparison, but also contrast. And not only on the literary level, but we'll also talk a bit about theological differences. So I look forward to spending this time with you and getting into God's Word in a different way than you usually do in Bible study.